Join me as I try to find out what happens when a rich businessman steps in to help a single mom juggling two jobs. Before we begin the story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button. This story takes place in Denver, Colorado, where the cost of living has been climbing faster than most people can keep up with. It's a city where a decent apartment can cost you $1,500 a month, and that's if you're lucky enough to find one. The mountains are beautiful, sure, but beauty doesn't pay the bills. Meet Sarah Martinez, a 29-year-old single mother of two kids, Emma, who's 8, and little Jake, who just turned 5. Sarah didn't plan to be a single mom. 3 years ago, she was married to her college sweetheart, living in a nice house in the suburbs of Lakewood, just outside Denver. She had a part-time job at a local bank, and life seemed pretty good. But then everything changed when her husband decided he wasn't ready for the responsibility of being a father and husband. One day, Sarah came home from work to find a note on the kitchen table and half their savings account emptied. Just like that, Sarah's world turned upside down. She couldn't afford the mortgage on their house anymore, so she had to sell it and move into a small 2-bedroom apartment in downtown Denver. The kids had to switch schools, leave their friends behind, and adjust to a completely new life. And Sarah? Well, Sarah had to figure out how to support 2 kids on her own. The part-time bank job wasn't going to cut it anymore. Sarah needed more money, and she needed it fast. So she did what millions of single parents do every day. She got creative. She kept her morning job at First National Bank on 17th Street, where she worked as a customer service representative from 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. The pay wasn't great, about $16 an hour, but it came with health insurance, which was something she couldn't afford to lose with 2 kids. But $16 an hour for 30 hours a week? That's barely $500 a week before taxes. After taxes, it was more like $400. Do the math. That's $1,600 a month, and her rent alone was $1,200. That left her with $400 for everything else. Food, gas, clothes for the kids, school supplies, and all those little expenses that add up faster than you can imagine. So Sarah did what she had to do. She found a second job. Every afternoon at 1:30 p.m., Sarah would pick up Emma and Jake from school and drop them off at her neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment. Mrs. Rodriguez was a sweet elderly woman who had raised 5 kids of her own and understood the struggle. She watched Sarah's kids for $10 a day, a price that was more about helping out than making money. Then Sarah would drive across town to the Cherry Creek Mall, where she worked as a sales associate at Macy's from 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. Another $15 an hour, another 30 hours a week. Between both jobs, Sarah was pulling in about $2,400 a month before taxes. Just enough to keep her head above water, but barely. The routine was exhausting. Sarah would wake up at 5:30 a.m., get the kids ready for school, drop them off at Montclair Elementary, and then rush to her first job. During her lunch break, she'd grab a quick sandwich from the deli across the street and use the time to pay bills online or make doctor's appointments for the kids. After work, she'd pick up the kids, drop them at Mrs. Rodriguez's, and then head to her second job. By the time Sarah got home at 9:30 p.m., she was running on empty. But her day wasn't over. She still had to pick up the kids, help Emma with her homework, get them both ready for bed, and then tackle her own responsibilities: laundry, cleaning, grocery shopping, and trying to squeeze in a few minutes to pay bills or handle all the little things that single parents have to manage alone. Weekends weren't much better. Sarah worked at Macy's on Saturdays, and Sundays were for catching up on everything she couldn't do during the week. Grocery shopping at the King Soopers on Colfax Avenue, taking the kids to the park if the weather was nice, doing laundry at the laundromat down the street because her apartment didn't have a washer and dryer. The hardest part wasn't the physical exhaustion, though that was real. The hardest part was the constant worry. Sarah would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, running numbers in her head. Emma needed new shoes. Hers were getting tight. Jake was outgrowing his clothes faster than she could replace them. The car was making a weird noise, and she couldn't afford to ignore it much longer. And what if one of the kids got sick? What if she got sick? There was no safety net, no backup plan. Sarah had dreams once. She'd studied marketing in college and always thought she'd work for a big advertising agency, maybe travel the world, create campaigns that people would remember. But life had other plans. Now, her biggest dream was making it through each month without having to choose between paying the rent and buying groceries. The other customers at the bank didn't know her story. To them, she was just the friendly woman behind the counter who always had a smile and helped them with their deposits and withdrawals. They had no idea that she was calculating how many hours she'd work that week, or that she was mentally planning her route from the bank to the school to Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment to the mall, trying to save 5 minutes here and there. The customers at Macy's didn't know either. They saw a helpful sales associate who knew where everything was and could help them find the perfect outfit or gift. They didn't know that Sarah was on her feet for 6 straight hours, that her back ached from standing, or that she was constantly checking her phone for messages from Mrs. Rodriguez about the kids. But Sarah never complained. She couldn't afford to. She had 2 little people depending on her, and she was determined to give them the best life she could. Even if it meant working herself to the bone, even if it meant having no time for herself, even if it meant falling into bed exhausted every single night. This was Sarah's reality, and it's the reality for millions of single parents across America. They work multiple jobs, sacrifice their own needs, and push themselves to the limit because they have to, because there's no other choice, because love means doing whatever it takes to take care of your kids, even when it feels impossible. Little did Sarah know that her life was about to change in a way she never could have imagined. It all started on a Tuesday morning in October, when a man in an expensive suit walked into First National Bank and noticed something that most people would have missed. Something that would set in motion a chain of events that would prove that sometimes, when you least expect it, kindness can come from the most surprising places. But we'll get to that part of the story soon. For now, just remember Sarah. Remember her strength, her determination, and her unwavering love for her children. Remember that behind every statistic about single parents working multiple jobs is a real person with real struggles, real dreams, and real hope for a better tomorrow. That Tuesday morning in October started like any other for Sarah Martinez. Her alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., and she hit the snooze button exactly once, a small luxury she allowed herself every day. 5 minutes later, she was up, padding quietly through her small apartment to start the coffee maker before waking up Emma and Jake. The morning routine was like clockwork. Get the kids up, make sure they brush their teeth, help Jake find his favorite Spider-Man shirt, which somehow always ended up in the oddest places, and pack their lunches. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches again. Sarah had tried to mix it up with turkey and cheese, but lunch meat was expensive, and the kids actually preferred PB&J anyway. By 6:45 a.m., Sarah was loading the kids into her 2015 Honda Civic, a car that had seen better days, but still got her where she needed to go. The drive to Montclair Elementary took about 15 minutes, depending on traffic, and then it was another 20 minutes to get to First National Bank on 17th Street. Sarah liked her job at the bank well enough. Her co-workers were friendly, and her manager, Linda, was understanding about the challenges of being a single mom. The work wasn't complicated, helping customers with deposits, withdrawals, account questions, and the occasional loan application. It was steady, predictable, and most importantly, it came with health insurance. Meanwhile, across town in the upscale Cherry Hills Village neighborhood, another morning routine was unfolding. This one belonged to Marcus Thompson, a 42-year-old entrepreneur who had built a successful tech company from the ground up. Marcus lived in a 6,000-square-foot house with a 3-car garage, a home office that was bigger than most people's apartments, and a view of the Rocky Mountains that real estate agents loved to brag about. Marcus had grown up in Detroit, in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce and dreams often got crushed by reality. His mom had worked 2 jobs too, one cleaning office buildings downtown, another stocking shelves at a grocery store. He remembered what it was like to eat cereal for dinner, because that's all they had left at the end of the month. He remembered his mom crying in the kitchen when she thought he was asleep, worried about how she'd pay the rent. But Marcus had been one of the lucky ones. He'd gotten a scholarship to study computer science at the University of Colorado, and after graduation, he'd started a software company that helped small businesses manage their finances. The company, Thompson Solutions, had grown from a one-man operation in his garage to a firm with 40 employees and offices in Denver, Colorado Springs, and Boulder. Success had been good to Marcus. He drove a Tesla Model S, ate at the best restaurants in Denver, and could afford pretty much anything he wanted. But success had also made him busy, maybe too busy. He worked long hours, traveled frequently for business, and had little time for relationships. He'd been married once, but his ex-wife had left him 3 years ago, saying he cared more about his company than he did about their marriage. She wasn't wrong. On this particular Tuesday morning, Marcus was dealing with a problem that would have been unthinkable to Sarah Martinez. His accountant had made an error in his quarterly tax payments, and now he needed to transfer $50,000 from his business account to his personal account to cover the difference. For Marcus, this was a minor inconvenience. For Sarah, $50,000 was more than she made in 2 years. Marcus usually handled his banking online, but this transaction required some additional verification, so he decided to visit his bank in person. He'd been banking at First National for 8 years, ever since his company had really started taking off. The branch on 17th Street was convenient to his office, and he'd built a good relationship with the business banking team there. At exactly 10:30 a.m., Marcus walked through the glass doors of First National Bank. He was wearing a navy blue suit that cost more than Sarah's monthly rent, Italian leather shoes, and a watch that could have paid for her kids' school supplies for the next 5 years. But Marcus wasn't thinking about any of that. He was thinking about his 11 a.m. meeting with a potential client and how he needed to get this banking issue resolved quickly. The bank was busier than usual that morning. There were about 6 people waiting in line, and Marcus took his place behind an elderly man who was arguing with his wife about whether they needed to make a deposit or a withdrawal. Marcus checked his phone, scrolled through his emails, and glanced around the bank with the impatience of someone who was used to getting things done quickly. That's when he noticed Sarah. She was behind the counter, helping a customer with what looked like a complicated issue. The customer seemed frustrated, but Sarah remained calm and patient, explaining something about overdraft fees and account balances. What caught Marcus's attention wasn't just her professionalism. It was something else. Maybe it was the way she moved with purpose, or the genuine smile she gave each customer, or the fact that she seemed to really care about helping people solve their problems. Marcus watched as Sarah finished with that customer and called out, "Next," with a cheerful voice that seemed to brighten the whole room. The elderly man in front of Marcus shuffled forward, still arguing with his wife, and Marcus found himself paying attention to how Sarah handled them. She was patient, kind, and somehow managed to resolve their confusion while making them both feel heard and respected. When it was finally Marcus's turn, he approached Sarah's window. Up close, he could see that she looked tired. Not just tired from a long morning, but the kind of tired that comes from working too many hours and carrying too much stress. But her smile was genuine as she looked up at him. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" Sarah asked, her fingers already moving to her keyboard, ready to assist with whatever he needed. Marcus explained his situation: the tax payment, the transfer, the verification requirements. As Sarah pulled up his account, her eyes widened slightly. She'd handled plenty of business accounts before, but seeing a balance with that many zeros still caught her off guard sometimes. She quickly composed herself and began processing his request. "This shouldn't take too long, Mr. Thompson," Sarah said, her voice professional but warm. "I just need to verify a few things, and then we can get this transfer processed for you." As Sarah worked, Marcus found himself watching her hands. They moved quickly and efficiently across the keyboard, but he noticed they were rougher than he'd expected. These weren't the soft hands of someone who spent their days in an office. These were the hands of someone who worked hard, really hard. "Are you having a good morning?" Marcus asked, making conversation while Sarah pulled up the necessary forms. Sarah smiled, but Marcus caught something in her expression, a flicker of something that might have been exhaustion or worry. "Oh, you know how it is," she said with a light laugh. "Tuesday mornings are always interesting. How about you? Big day ahead?" Marcus nodded. "A few meetings, nothing too exciting." "Do you work here full-time?" For just a moment, Sarah hesitated. It was such a simple question, but the answer was complicated. "I work here mornings," she said finally. "I have another job in the afternoons." Something in the way she said it made Marcus pause. There was no complaint in her voice, no request for sympathy. Just a simple statement of fact. But Marcus had grown up watching his mom work multiple jobs, and he recognized something in Sarah's tone that took him right back to his childhood in Detroit. "2 jobs?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "That must keep you busy." Sarah nodded, still focused on his paperwork. "It does, but you do what you have to do, right?" She looked up at him with a smile that was both tired and determined. "Especially when you have kids." And there it was, the piece of the puzzle that Marcus had been sensing but couldn't quite place. Sarah was a single mom, working 2 jobs to support her family. Just like his mother had done 30 years ago in Detroit. Marcus felt something stir in his chest, a mixture of recognition, respect, and something else he couldn't quite name. Here was a woman who was clearly struggling, working incredibly hard, and yet she was helping him with a $50,000 transaction as if it were the most important thing in the world. She was treating him with kindness and professionalism, even though he probably made more money in a month than she made in a year. "How old are your kids?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious now. Sarah's whole face lit up. "Emma's 8 and Jake just turned 5. They're amazing kids, really. Emma's so smart, she's already reading at a 4th grade level. And Jake, he's got this incredible imagination. He wants to be a superhero when he grows up." Marcus smiled. "That's great. It sounds like you're doing a wonderful job with them." Sarah blushed slightly. "I try my best. Some days are harder than others, but they're worth it, you know? They're everything to me. As Sarah finished processing Marcus's transaction, he found himself thinking about his own childhood. He remembered his mom coming home from her second job, exhausted but always making time to help him with homework or read him a story. He remembered the sacrifices she'd made, the dreams she'd put on hold, all so he could have a better life. "Okay, Mr. Thompson," Sarah said, handing him his receipt. "Your transfer is complete. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" Marcus took the receipt, but he didn't move away from the window. He was looking at Sarah with a new understanding, seeing not just a bank employee, but a person with her own struggles, her own dreams, her own story. "Actually," Marcus said, "I was wondering, do you get a lunch break?" Sarah looked surprised. Yes, I usually take my break around noon." "Why?" Marcus wasn't sure why he was asking. He just knew that something about this interaction felt important, different from the dozens of other banking transactions he'd conducted over the years. "I don't know," Marcus said honestly. "I guess I was just thinking that you seem like someone who works really hard, and maybe you deserve to have someone buy you lunch for a change." Sarah stared at him for a moment, clearly taken aback. Customers didn't usually ask bank employees out to lunch. "That's very kind of you," she said carefully, "but I actually use my lunch break to handle some personal things. Doctor's appointments, school stuff for the kids, you know how it is." Marcus nodded, feeling slightly embarrassed. "Of course. I didn't mean to impose." "No, it's not that," Sarah said quickly. "It's just, my life is pretty complicated right now." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. He could see the conflict in her eyes. She was probably wondering if this was appropriate, if accepting lunch from a customer would get her in trouble, if this successful businessman could possibly understand what her life was really like. "I understand," Marcus said finally. "But if you ever change your mind, or if there's anything I can do to help." He trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. Sarah smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. That's really sweet of you to offer." As Marcus walked away from the window, he couldn't shake the feeling that this conversation had changed something. He'd walked into the bank thinking about tax payments and client meetings, but he was leaving thinking about a single mom named Sarah who worked 2 jobs and lit up when she talked about her kids. For the rest of the day, Marcus found himself distracted. During his client meeting, he kept thinking about Sarah's tired eyes and rough hands. During his afternoon conference call, he remembered the way she'd said, "You do what you have to do," without a trace of self-pity. And that evening, as he sat in his empty house eating takeout from an expensive restaurant, he thought about Sarah probably helping her kids with homework after working 2 jobs. Marcus had built a successful company, accumulated wealth, and achieved everything he'd thought he wanted. But sitting in his big house, he realized that he'd somehow lost touch with the struggles that had shaped him. He'd forgotten what it felt like to worry about paying the rent, to work multiple jobs just to get by, to sacrifice your own needs for the people you love. Meeting Sarah had reminded him of all of that. And more than that, it had reminded him that there were people out there, good people, hard-working people, people who deserved better, who were fighting battles every single day just to survive. As Marcus went to bed that night, he made a decision. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do, but he knew he had to do something. Sarah had helped him with his banking, but somehow she'd also helped him remember who he used to be and who he wanted to be again. Tomorrow, he would go back to the bank. And this time, he would be ready to help her in return. The next morning, Sarah woke up to the sound of Jake coughing. Not just a little morning cough, but the kind of deep chest-rattling cough that every parent knows means trouble. She rushed to his room and found him sitting up in bed, his face flushed with fever. "Mommy, my throat hurts," Jake whispered, his voice hoarse and barely audible. Sarah's heart sank. She pressed her hand to his forehead. He was burning up. A quick check with the thermometer confirmed her fears. 102.3 degrees. Jake was definitely sick, and from the sound of that cough, it wasn't just a simple cold. Emma appeared in the doorway, already dressed for school. "Is Jake okay, Mom?" Sarah forced a smile. "He's just not feeling well, sweetheart. You go ahead and get your backpack ready. I need to make some phone calls." As Emma headed back to her room, Sarah's mind started racing. Jake was too sick to go to school, which meant she couldn't drop him off at Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment, which meant she couldn't go to work, which meant she'd lose a day's pay at the bank, money she absolutely could not afford to lose. Sarah grabbed her phone and called Linda, her manager at First National. "Linda, I'm so sorry to call this early," Sarah said, trying to keep the stress out of her voice. "Jake is really sick with a fever, and I can't bring him to daycare. I know it's short notice, but I'm going to need to take a sick day." Linda was understanding, as always. "Of course, Sarah. Take care of your little guy. We'll manage here." But Sarah knew that "we'll manage" meant she'd be behind on her work tomorrow, and more importantly, she'd be short about $120 in her paycheck this week. Money she'd already mentally allocated to groceries and Jake's upcoming dentist appointment. Next, she called Macy's. Her afternoon supervisor, Kevin, was less understanding. "Sarah, we've got a big shipment coming in today, and I really need you here," Kevin said, his voice already showing irritation. "Can't you find someone else to watch the kid?" Sarah bit her tongue. She wanted to tell Kevin that Jake wasn't just the kid. He was her 5-year-old son who was running a high fever. She wanted to explain that she'd already called everyone she could think of, but Mrs. Rodriguez was battling her own health issues and couldn't risk getting sick. She wanted to say that if she had other options, she'd use them. Instead, she said, "I'm really sorry, Kevin. I know it's inconvenient, but I don't have anyone else who can watch him when he's this sick." Kevin sighed loudly. "Fine, but this is the second time this month, Sarah. I can't have employees who aren't reliable." Sarah felt her cheeks burn. The first time had been when Emma had gotten sick with a stomach bug. Both times, she'd given as much notice as possible. Both times, she'd tried to find alternative childcare. But Kevin was right about one thing. She'd missed work twice in 1 month, and in the retail world, that was a problem. After hanging up, Sarah sat on the edge of Jake's bed and tried not to cry. She was looking at losing about $240 in wages this week, and that was money she simply didn't have. Her rent was due in 12 days, and she was already cutting it close. But first, she needed to get Jake to a doctor. Sarah called Emma into the room. "Honey, I need you to stay home from school today to help me take care of Jake. I know it's not ideal, but I promise we'll make it up." Emma, who was mature beyond her 8 years, just nodded. "It's okay, Mom. I can help." Sarah loaded both kids into the Honda Civic and drove to the urgent care clinic on East Colfax. The waiting room was packed. Apparently, there was some kind of bug going around. Sarah checked in and was told it would be about a 2-hour wait. 2 hours. Sarah looked at the clock on the wall and calculated. If they were seen by noon, and if the doctor didn't want to run any tests, they might be done by 1 p.m. She could still make it to Macy's by 3 p.m. for her shift. Maybe she could salvage half of her workday. But as they sat in the waiting room, Jake's condition seemed to get worse. His fever climbed to 103, and he started complaining that his ear hurt. Emma sat quietly beside them, reading a book she'd brought from home, occasionally rubbing Jake's back when he coughed. Finally, after nearly 3 hours, they were called back. The doctor, a kind woman named Dr. Patel, examined Jake thoroughly. "He's got a pretty bad ear infection," Dr. Patel explained. "That's what's causing the fever and the cough. The good news is, it's treatable with antibiotics. The bad news is, he needs to stay home for at least 2 days to make sure he's not contagious." Sarah's heart sank. 2 days. That meant missing work at the bank tomorrow too, and probably her Friday shift at Macy's. She was looking at losing nearly $500 in wages. "I'm going to prescribe amoxicillin," Dr. Patel continued, writing on her prescription pad. "Make sure he takes it twice a day with food. And keep him hydrated. If his fever doesn't break by tomorrow evening, bring him back." Sarah nodded, taking the prescription. She didn't mention that she was already doing the math on whether she could afford both the doctor's visit and the prescription. Her insurance would cover most of the visit, but there would still be a copay. And depending on the medication, the prescription could cost anywhere from $20 to $50. They left the clinic at 2:30 p.m. Sarah called Kevin at Macy's to let him know she definitely wouldn't make it in. "This is really not working out, Sarah," Kevin said, his voice cold. "I need employees I can count on." "I understand your frustration," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "But my son is really sick, and I don't have anyone else who can watch him." "Look, I get that you're a single mom, but that's not the store's problem," Kevin replied. "I've got a business to run. If you can't commit to your scheduled shifts, maybe you need to think about whether this job is right for you." Sarah felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. Was Kevin threatening to fire her? She needed this job. She needed both jobs. "Kevin, please," Sarah said, hating how desperate she sounded. "I'm usually very reliable. This is just a tough week. It won't happen again." "We'll see," Kevin said before hanging up. Sarah sat in the parking lot of the Walgreens pharmacy, trying to compose herself before taking the kids inside. Emma was looking at her with worried eyes. "Mom, are you okay?" Emma asked. Sarah forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking about some grown-up stuff. Let's go get Jake's medicine." Inside the pharmacy, Sarah handed over the prescription and was told it would be ready in about 20 minutes. She wandered the aisles with the kids, trying to kill time. Jake was leaning heavily against her, clearly exhausted from the fever and the long morning. When the prescription was ready, Sarah held her breath as the pharmacist rang it up. "That'll be $47.50, the pharmacist said. Sarah's checking account had $62 in it until her next paycheck. After buying the medicine, she'd have less than $15 to last until Friday. And that was assuming she didn't miss any more work this week. She handed over her debit card, praying it wouldn't be declined. The transaction went through, and Sarah felt a mixture of relief and panic. Relief that Jake would get the medicine he needed, panic about how she'd buy groceries for the rest of the week. That evening, after giving Jake his first dose of antibiotics and getting both kids settled, Sarah sat at her small kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills. The numbers weren't good. Rent, $1,200 due in 11 days, electric bill, $89 already overdue, phone bill, $75 due in 3 days, car payment, $220 due in a week, groceries. She usually budgeted $80 per week, but with only $14.50 left in her account, that wasn't happening. Sarah had about $340 coming in her paycheck on Friday, but that was before taxes. After taxes, it would be closer to $270. Even if she didn't miss any more work this week, She'd have about $285 to cover $1,584 in expenses. The math was impossible. Sarah put her head in her hands. She could ask her mom for help, but her mom was living on Social Security in a small apartment in Colorado Springs. She barely had enough to cover her own expenses. Sarah's sister lived in Phoenix and had her own family to worry about. She could try to pick up extra shifts at Macy's, but Kevin was already questioning her reliability. And besides, extra shifts would mean more money for Mrs. Rodriguez, which would eat into any additional earnings. Sarah looked around her small apartment. She'd already sold everything of value when she'd moved out of the house. Her wedding ring, the nice furniture, even some of her college textbooks. There was nothing left to sell. Maybe she could get a cash advance on her credit card, but that card was already maxed out from the last time she'd faced a financial emergency. The minimum payment alone was $85 a month. Sarah felt the familiar weight of despair settling on her shoulders. She was working as hard as she could, doing everything right, but it still wasn't enough. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't seem to get ahead. Every time she started to catch up, something happened, a sick kid, a car repair, an unexpected expense, and she was right back where she started. The worst part was knowing that her kids were starting to notice. Emma had stopped asking for things at the store. Jake had stopped talking about wanting new toys. They were learning to expect less, to ask for less, to be grateful for whatever they got. And while Sarah was proud of how mature and understanding they were, it broke her heart that they had to be. Sarah remembered her conversation with Marcus Thompson at the bank the day before. He'd seemed so kind, so genuine when he'd offered to buy her lunch. For a moment, she'd actually considered saying yes. When was the last time someone had offered to do something nice for her, just because? But of course, she couldn't have said yes. She didn't have time for lunch with customers, even nice ones. And besides, what would they have talked about? Her 2 jobs, her struggles, her constant worry about money? He seemed successful, put together. He probably couldn't even imagine what her life was like. Sarah looked at the clock. It was 11:30 p.m., and she needed to be up at 5:30 a.m. If Jake was feeling better, she'd drop both kids at Mrs. Rodriguez's and go to work. If he wasn't, she'd have to call in sick again and lose another day's pay. As she got ready for bed, Sarah tried to think of solutions. Maybe she could find a weekend job, something she could do while the kids were with her. Maybe she could sell plasma. She'd heard you could make about $50 a week doing that. Maybe she could start a side business, though she had no idea what kind of business she could start with no money and no time. But deep down, Sarah knew that these weren't real solutions. They were just ways of rearranging the same impossible puzzle. She was trapped in a cycle where she worked constantly but never earned enough, where every emergency pushed her further behind, where her best efforts weren't enough to provide the life she wanted for her kids. Before she fell asleep, Sarah did what she did every night. She checked on Emma and Jake, kissing their foreheads and whispering that she loved them. Emma was sound asleep, but Jake stirred when she touched his forehead. His fever had broken, thank God. "Mommy," Jake whispered. "Yeah, baby. Are you sad?" Sarah's heart clenched. "Why would you ask that, sweetheart? You looked sad at dinner. Are we in trouble?" Sarah smoothed Jake's hair back from his forehead. "No, baby. We're not in trouble. Mommy just has some things to figure out, but everything's going to be okay." Jake nodded sleepily. "I love you, Mommy. I love you too, Jake. More than anything in the world." As Sarah finally crawled into bed, she tried to hold on to that moment, the simple, pure love between her and her children. That was what mattered. That was what she was fighting for. Everything else was just noise. But as she closed her eyes, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was drowning. She was working as hard as she could, but the water kept rising. And she was starting to wonder how much longer she could keep her head above the surface. Tomorrow, she'd go back to the bank, put on her professional smile, and help customers with their transactions. She'd act like everything was fine, like she wasn't falling apart inside. Because that's what you did when you were a single mom working 2 jobs. You kept going, no matter what. But tonight, alone in her small bedroom, Sarah allowed herself to feel the full weight of her struggles. And for just a moment, she wondered if things would ever get easier. Marcus Thompson had built his success on one simple principle: pay attention to details that others miss. It's what had made him a millionaire by age 35 and what kept his company ahead of the competition. But as he walked into First National Bank that Wednesday morning, he wasn't thinking about business details. He was thinking about Sarah Martinez. He'd spent the previous evening researching something he'd never thought much about before: what it actually costs to raise kids as a single parent in Denver. The numbers were staggering. Childcare alone could run $1,200 a month per child. Health insurance, if you could get it, was another $400 to $500. Add in rent, food, utilities, transportation, and basic necessities, and a single parent needed to make at least $60,000 a year just to get by. And that was without any emergencies, without saving for the future, without any of the small luxuries that made life bearable. Marcus made more than that in a month. When he approached the bank that morning, he noticed Sarah wasn't at her usual window. Instead, there was a younger guy named Trevor who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Marcus waited in line, hoping Sarah was just on a break or helping another customer. But when it was his turn, Trevor greeted him with all the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. "How can I help you today?" Trevor asked, not looking up from his computer screen. "Is Sarah working today?" Marcus asked. "Sarah Martinez? She usually works the morning shift." Trevor shrugged. "She called in sick. Family emergency or something. What can I do for you?" Marcus felt a knot form in his stomach. Family emergency. Given what Sarah had told him about her kids, that probably meant one of them was sick. Which meant she was losing money she couldn't afford to lose, staying home to take care of a child when she desperately needed every hour of work she could get. "Actually, I don't need any banking today," Marcus said. "Thanks anyway." He left the bank feeling unsettled. For the rest of the morning, he found himself distracted during meetings, wondering if Sarah's emergency was serious, if her kids were okay, if she was managing the financial stress of missing work. Marcus had grown up poor, but that was a long time ago. Sometimes he forgot what it felt like to have every unexpected expense feel like a crisis. Missing one day of work when you had plenty of money was an inconvenience. Missing one day of work when you were already stretched thin was a disaster. Thursday morning, Marcus was back at the bank. This time, Sarah was there, but something was different. Her usual bright smile seemed forced, and there were dark circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept much. When she greeted customers, her voice had the same professional warmth, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept checking her phone during brief lulls. Marcus waited until there was no line at Sarah's window, then approached with a simple transaction, just a balance inquiry that he could have easily done on his phone. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," Sarah said, and her smile became a little more genuine. "How are you today?" "I'm well, thanks. How are you? I hope everything's okay with your family." Sarah's professional mask slipped for just a moment, and Marcus saw something raw and tired in her eyes. Oh, you heard about that? Yes, my son was sick yesterday. He's doing better now. Thank you for asking. That's good to hear. It must be tough when they get sick, especially when you have to miss work. Sarah nodded, her fingers already pulling up his account information. It is what it is. You do what you have to do for your kids, right? There it was again, that phrase. You do what you have to do. Marcus was beginning to understand that this was Sarah's way of acknowledging hardship without asking for sympathy or help. As Sarah processed his simple transaction, Marcus found himself really watching her. He noticed the way she moved efficiently but carefully, like someone who couldn't afford to make mistakes. He saw how she kept one eye on the clock, probably calculating how much of her lunch break she'd need to use for errands. He observed the way she touched her phone every few minutes, likely checking for messages from whoever was watching her kids. Mr. Thompson, your account balance is $847,293.52. Is there anything else I can help you with today? The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. Not because it was wrong, his business had been doing very well, but because of the contrast. He had almost $850,000 sitting in one account, money he barely thought about, while the woman helping him was probably worried about having enough cash to buy groceries. Actually, Marcus said, I was wondering if you take your lunch break around the same time every day. Sarah looked puzzled. Usually around noon, why? Marcus wasn't sure why he was asking. He just knew that he couldn't walk away again without doing something. I was thinking about what you said yesterday, about not having time for lunch. I know you said your life is complicated, but everyone deserves to eat a good meal sometimes. Sarah glanced around the bank, clearly uncomfortable with the personal direction of the conversation. Mr. Thompson, that's very kind, but really I'm fine. I usually just grab something quick from the deli across the street. The deli across the street. Marcus looked through the bank's windows at the small corner store with its faded awning and barred windows. He'd never paid attention to it before, but now he could see it for what it was. The kind of place that sold microwaved sandwiches and overpriced snacks to people who couldn't afford anything better. Sarah, Marcus said quietly, when was the last time someone took you out for a real meal? Not fast food, not a quick sandwich, but an actual restaurant where someone else cooks for you and brings your food to your table. Sarah stared at him for a long moment. Marcus could see her trying to remember, and the fact that it was taking her so long to answer told him everything he needed to know. It's been a while, she admitted finally. But really, Mr. Thompson, you don't need to worry about me. I'm doing fine. Marcus nodded, but he was starting to understand Sarah's language. Doing fine meant surviving. It is what it is, meant accepting circumstances that shouldn't be acceptable. You do what you have to do meant working yourself to exhaustion because there were no other options. I understand, Marcus said, but the offer stands. If you ever change your mind, or if you ever want to just sit down somewhere nice for an hour and let someone else worry about the details, I'd be happy to make that happen. After leaving the bank, Marcus couldn't concentrate on work. He kept thinking about Sarah's tired eyes, about the way she'd had to remember when she'd last eaten at a real restaurant, about the fact that she was probably spending her lunch break running errands or handling the dozen other responsibilities that fell to a single parent. That afternoon, Marcus did something he'd never done before. He drove to Cherry Creek Mall and walked through Macy's until he found Sarah. She was in the women's clothing section, helping an elderly customer find a dress for her granddaughter's wedding. Marcus watched from a distance as Sarah patiently showed the woman different options, helped her think through colors and sizes, and treated her with the same kindness she'd shown at the bank. Even here, working her second job on her feet all afternoon. Sarah was giving every customer her full attention. When the elderly woman left with her purchase, Marcus approached Sarah. She looked surprised to see him, and maybe a little worried. "Mr. Thompson, is everything okay? Is there a problem with your transaction from this morning?" "No, nothing like that," Marcus said quickly. "I was just shopping and saw you here. This is your second job." Sarah nodded, glancing around to make sure her supervisor wasn't watching. Personal conversations with customers weren't exactly encouraged. "From 3 to 9, Monday through Saturday," she confirmed. "It helps with the bills." Marcus did the quick math. Sarah was working about 60 hours a week between both jobs. That was more than he worked, and he was running a company. "Do you ever have time for yourself?" Marcus asked. Sarah laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. "Time for myself? That's a luxury I can't afford right now. Maybe when the kids are older." Marcus looked around the department store, taking in the fluorescent lighting, the constant background music, the endless stream of customers. "This must be exhausting, being on your feet all day after working at the bank all morning." "It's not so bad," Sarah said, and Marcus was beginning to recognize this as another one of her phrases. Not so bad probably meant it was terrible, but complaining wouldn't change anything. A customer approached with a question about return policies, and Sarah immediately shifted into professional mode. Marcus stepped back and continued watching. He saw how Sarah helped customer after customer with genuine care, even though she was clearly tired. He noticed how she would discreetly stretch her back when she thought no one was looking, how she checked her phone whenever she had a free moment, probably making sure her kids were okay. Around 6 p.m., Marcus watched as Sarah took what appeared to be her break. Instead of sitting down or getting something to eat, she walked quickly to a quiet corner of the store and made a phone call. From her expression and the way she was gesturing, it looked like she was handling some kind of problem. Marcus couldn't hear the conversation, but he could see the stress on her face. When Sarah returned to the sales floor, she looked even more tired than before. Whatever that phone call had been about, it hadn't been good news. Marcus left the mall that evening with a new understanding of what Sarah's life really looked like. He'd thought he understood when she'd told him she worked 2 jobs, but seeing it firsthand was different. This wasn't just about working long hours. This was about a woman who was running herself into the ground because she had no other choice. That night, Marcus sat in his home office, staring out at the city lights of Denver. His house was quiet, too quiet. He had a refrigerator full of food he'd never eat, closets full of clothes he barely wore, and accounts full of money he didn't really need. Meanwhile, somewhere across the city, Sarah was probably helping her kids with homework after working 13 hours, trying to figure out how to stretch her grocery budget to last another few days. Marcus thought about his mother again, about the nights she'd come home from her second job, so tired she could barely stand. He remembered being Jake's age and not understanding why his mom was always so busy, why she couldn't come to school events like other parents, why she sometimes cried when she thought he wasn't looking. The difference was, his mother had been alone in her struggle. But Sarah didn't have to be. Marcus had money, more money than he knew what to do with. But more than that, he had resources, connections, and the ability to solve problems. For years, he'd used those gifts to build his business and accumulate wealth. But what was the point of having all of that if he couldn't use it to help someone who genuinely needed it? The question wasn't whether he should help Sarah. The question was how to do it in a way that would actually make a difference, and in a way that would allow her to maintain her dignity and independence. Sarah was proud. He could see that. She wasn't looking for charity or handouts. She was looking for opportunities, for a chance to build something better for herself and her kids. Marcus opened his laptop and started researching. If he was going to help Sarah, he was going to do it right. He was going to understand her situation completely, think through all the implications, and come up with a plan that would truly change her life. Because somewhere in the past 2 days, helping Sarah Martinez had stopped being just a nice gesture. It had become the most important thing Marcus Thompson had ever set out to accomplish. And he was just getting started. Friday morning arrived with a crisis that Sarah should have seen coming, but somehow hadn't. Jake was feeling much better, his fever completely gone, but Emma woke up with the same scratchy throat and tired eyes that had marked the beginning of Jake's illness just 3 days earlier. Sarah sat on the edge of Emma's bed, feeling like the universe was playing some kind of cruel joke on her. One sick kid she could manage barely, but 2 sick kids in 1 week? When she'd already missed 2 days of work and Kevin at Macy's was questioning her reliability. "Mom, I don't feel good," Emma whispered, her voice already hoarse. Sarah touched her daughter's forehead. Sure enough, she was running a low-grade fever. Not as high as Jake's had been, but enough that she couldn't go to school, and definitely enough that Mrs. Rodriguez wouldn't be able to watch her. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to think. She'd already used up her sick days at the bank for the year. Linda would probably understand, but it would mean another day without pay. And Macy's. She couldn't even think about calling Kevin again. Not after his threats earlier in the week. But what choice did she have? She couldn't leave Emma with a fever, and she certainly couldn't bring her to work. Sarah made the calls, each one harder than the last. Linda was understanding but concerned. Missing 3 days in 1 week was a lot, even with sick kids. Kevin was furious. "Sarah, this is ridiculous." Kevin's voice was sharp through the phone. "I don't care what your family situation is. I need employees who show up. Don't bother coming in this weekend. We'll talk about your future with the company on Monday." Sarah's heart stopped. Kevin was essentially suspending her, which meant she wouldn't get paid for her weekend shifts either. That was another $180 gone, money she desperately needed for rent. After hanging up, Sarah sat at her kitchen table and did the math one more time. With missing 3 days at the bank and now losing her weekend shifts at Macy's, she was looking at being short almost $700 this month. Her rent was due on Monday, and she was still $430 short. Sarah had been in tight spots before, but this felt different. This felt impossible. That's when she remembered something her sister had mentioned months ago. There was a payday loan place on Colfax Avenue that offered quick cash advances. Sarah had always sworn she'd never use one of those places. She'd heard the horror stories about the interest rates and the cycle of debt they created. But what other option did she have? Sarah bundled both kids into the car, even though Emma was clearly feeling awful. She couldn't leave them alone, and she needed to handle this before the weekend. The payday loan office was exactly what she'd expected. A small storefront wedged between a pawn shop and a liquor store, with barred windows and neon signs promising fast cash. Sarah felt sick to her stomach as she walked in with Emma and Jake. The man behind the counter, who introduced himself as Ray, was friendly enough. He explained the process. Sarah could borrow $500 against her next paycheck. The fee was $75, which seemed reasonable until Ray explained that the loan was due in 2 weeks. If she couldn't pay it back in full, she could roll it over for another $75 fee. Sarah did the quick math. $75 on a $500 loan for 2 weeks worked out to an annual interest rate of almost 400%. It was predatory and she knew it, but she also knew she had no other choice. I need to think about it, Sarah said, gathering the kids to leave. No problem, Ray said, handing her a business card. We're here when you need us. And trust me, honey, most people who walk in here end up coming back. As Sarah drove home, she felt trapped. The payday loan would solve her immediate problem, but create a bigger one down the road. But without it, she couldn't pay rent, and getting evicted would be even worse for the kids. That afternoon, while both kids napped, Sarah called her mom in Colorado Springs. "Mom, I hate to ask this, but I'm in a really tough spot," Sarah began, then explained the situation. Her mother was quiet for a long moment. "Honey, you know I'd help if I could. But my Social Security barely covers my own rent and medication. I've got maybe $50 I could send you, but that's all." Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. "I know, Mom. I'm sorry for even asking. I just don't know what else to do." After hanging up, Sarah sat in her quiet living room and seriously considered her options. She could call her ex-husband, but he'd made it clear 3 years ago that he wanted nothing to do with his family responsibilities. She could ask for an advance on her paycheck, but the bank had strict policies about that. She could try to borrow from friends, but most of her friends were single parents too, dealing with their own financial struggles. Sarah was running out of ideas when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "Hello. Hi, is this Sarah Martinez?" "Yes, who's this?" "This is Marcus Thompson. We met at the bank earlier this week. I hope you don't mind that I got your number from. Well, I asked around a bit. I hope that's not too forward." Sarah was confused. Why would a wealthy customer be calling her at home? "Mr. Thompson? Is there a problem with your account?" "No, nothing like that. I was actually calling because I was at the bank this morning and you weren't there. I wanted to make sure everything was okay." Sarah felt a flutter of panic. Had the bank told him she'd called in sick? Was she in trouble for missing work? Yes, everything's fine. My daughter is sick today, so I had to stay home." "I'm sorry to hear that. That must be really stressful, especially after your son was sick earlier this week." Something in Marcus's voice made Sarah pause. He didn't sound like a customer making polite conversation. He sounded genuinely concerned. "It's okay," Sarah said automatically. "These things happen." "Sarah," Marcus said quietly, "can I ask you something? And please, feel free to tell me it's none of my business. But are you okay? I mean really okay?" The question caught Sarah completely off guard. When was the last time someone had asked her that and actually wanted to know the answer? I'm managing," Sarah said, her voice cracking slightly. "That's not what I asked. Are you okay?" Sarah closed her eyes. She was so tired of pretending, so tired of being strong all the time, so tired of saying everything was fine when it wasn't. "No," she whispered. "I'm not okay." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Would you be willing to meet me somewhere? Just to talk? I know this might sound strange, but I'd really like to help if I can." Sarah's first instinct was to say no. She didn't take charity, and she certainly didn't air her personal problems to bank customers. But something about Marcus's voice, the genuine concern she heard there, made her reconsider. "I can't leave the kids," Sarah said. "Emma's really not feeling well. What if I came to you? I could bring some soup for Emma, maybe some tea. We could just talk." Sarah looked around her small apartment. It was clean, but obviously the home of someone without much money. The furniture was secondhand, the TV was old, and there were stacks of bills on the kitchen counter that she hadn't been able to bring herself to open. But Emma was sick, Jake was bouncing off the walls with energy, and Sarah was at the end of her rope. "Okay," she said finally, giving him her address. "But Mr. Thompson, I'm not looking for charity. I could use someone to talk to. I understand. And please call me Marcus. An hour later, there was a knock on Sarah's door. She opened it to find Marcus standing there with bags from Whole Foods, soup, tea, orange juice, and what looked like enough groceries to feed a family for a week. I wasn't sure what the kids would like, Marcus said, looking slightly embarrassed by the amount of food he'd brought. I might have gone a little overboard. Sarah stared at the bags, then at Marcus. He was dressed more casually than she'd seen him at the bank. Jeans and a sweater instead of his usual suit, but she could tell the clothes were expensive. Everything about him screamed success and money, which made his presence in her modest apartment even more surreal. Marcus, this is too much, Sarah said, but she was already thinking about the nearly empty refrigerator and the $14.50 in her checking account. It's not too much, Marcus said firmly. May I come in? Sarah stepped aside, suddenly self-conscious about her small living room with its thrift store furniture and children's toys scattered around. Emma was curled up on the couch with a blanket, looking miserable, while Jake was building something elaborate with Legos on the floor. Jake, this is Mr. Thompson, Sarah said. He brought you some soup. Emma managed a small wave, while Jake looked up with the open curiosity of a 5-year-old. Are you Mom's friend? Jake asked. Marcus smiled. I hope so. I brought some books too, if you're interested. As Marcus unpacked the groceries, Sarah watched in amazement. There was enough food here to last 2 weeks. Fresh fruits and vegetables, good bread, real juice instead of the watered-down stuff she usually bought. She wanted to protest, to maintain her pride, but the practical part of her brain was calculating how much money this would save her. Marcus, Sarah said quietly, I can't accept all this. It's too much. Marcus stopped unpacking and turned to look at her. Sarah, can I tell you something? When I was Jake's age, my mom worked 2 jobs just like you do. I remember what it was like to watch her come home exhausted every night, to see her worry about money, to know she was sacrificing everything for me. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. I don't want my kids to remember that about me. They won't, Marcus said gently. What they'll remember is how hard you worked for them, how much you loved them, how you never gave up. But that doesn't mean you have to do it alone. Why? Sarah asked, the word coming out more forcefully than she'd intended. Why do you care? You don't even know me. Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Because someone should have helped my mom, and no one did. Because you're working harder than anyone should have to work, and it's still not enough. Because you deserve better, and so do your kids. Sarah sank into a chair at her small kitchen table. I'm supposed to pay rent on Monday, and I'm $430 short. I was thinking about getting a payday loan, which I know is stupid, but I don't know what else to do. I might lose my job at Macy's because I've missed too much work with sick kids. And I feel like I'm failing at everything. Marcus sat down across from her. You're not failing. The system is failing you. A single parent shouldn't have to work 60 hours a week and still not be able to pay rent. That's not a personal failure. That's a broken system. But what am I supposed to do about it? Sarah asked, frustrated tears finally spilling over. I can't change the system. I can only try to survive in it. Marcus leaned forward. What if I told you that you don't have to just survive? What if there was a way to actually get ahead, to build something better for you and the kids? Sarah wiped her eyes. I'd say that sounds too good to be true. Maybe. But what if it wasn't? What if there was someone who wanted to invest in you, not as charity, but as a business opportunity? Someone who thinks you have skills and potential that are being wasted on survival. Sarah looked at him skeptically. What kind of business opportunity? Marcus smiled. That's what I'd like to talk to you about. But first, let me ask you something. If money wasn't an issue, if you knew your rent was paid and your kids were taken care of, what would you want to do with your life? Sarah stared at him. It had been so long since anyone had asked her about her dreams that she'd almost forgotten she had any. I studied marketing in college, she said slowly. I always wanted to help small businesses grow, create campaigns that actually meant something to people. But that was before life got in the way, Marcus finished. But what if life could get back on track? What if you could use those skills, build something of your own? Sarah felt something stirring in her chest, something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. What exactly are you proposing? She asked. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her a website. This is my company, Thompson Solutions. We help small businesses with their marketing and financial planning. I've been thinking about expanding, bringing in someone who understands what it's like to struggle, someone who could really connect with small business owners who are trying to make it. Sarah looked at the website, then back at Marcus. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership, Marcus said. A chance to build something together. A chance to use your education and your experience in a way that could change everything for you and your kids. Sarah felt her heart racing. It sounded incredible, but it also sounded impossible. Marcus, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I can't just leave my jobs. I have bills, responsibilities. I can't take risks like that. What if you didn't have to take the risk alone? Marcus asked. What if I covered your expenses while you got started? What if we structured it so you had security while you built something new? Sarah stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. Why would you do that? What's in it for you? Marcus smiled. Honestly, I think you'd be amazing at this. I think you understand customer service and hard work in a way that most people don't. And I think my company would be better with someone like you involved. He paused, then added more quietly. And maybe I'd sleep better at night knowing that someone who deserves a break actually got one. Sarah looked around her apartment, at Emma sick on the couch, at Jake playing with his toys, at the stack of bills on the counter, at the groceries Marcus had brought that would feed her family for weeks. For the first time in 3 years, Sarah allowed herself to imagine a different life. A life where she didn't have to work 2 jobs just to survive. A life where she could use her education and build something meaningful. A life where her kids could see her as something more than someone who was always tired and stressed about money. What would I have to do? Sarah asked quietly. Marcus grinned. First, you'd have to stop working yourself to death. Then, we'd start planning how to change your world. Sarah took a deep breath. She was terrified, but for the first time in years, she was also excited. Okay, she said. Let's talk. 6 months later, Sarah Martinez walked into the Starbucks on 16th Street Mall in downtown Denver. But this time she wasn't rushing between jobs or checking her watch every few minutes. She was meeting Marcus for their weekly business planning session, and for the first time in years, she had time to actually enjoy her coffee. The transformation in Sarah's life hadn't happened overnight. It had taken weeks of careful planning, long conversations, and small steps toward building something bigger. Marcus had been true to his word in ways that still amazed Sarah every day. The first thing he'd done was simple but life-changing. He'd paid her rent for 3 months while she transitioned out of her 2 jobs and into her new role at Thompson Solutions. Not as a loan, not as charity, but as an investment in their partnership. Sarah had insisted on a written agreement that laid out exactly how she'd pay him back once the business became profitable. The second thing Marcus had done was help Sarah negotiate her exit from both jobs professionally. Instead of just quitting, They'd worked out a transition plan. Linda at the bank had been sad to see Sarah go, but thrilled about her opportunity. Kevin at Macy's had been less gracious, but Sarah found she didn't care much about his opinion anymore. The most important thing Marcus had done, though, was listen to Sarah's ideas and treat them with the respect they deserved. In those first few weeks, as they sat in coffee shops and in Marcus's office, he'd asked Sarah dozens of questions about her experiences as a customer, as a working mom, as someone trying to make ends meet. And he'd actually taken notes. You know what small business owners really need? Sarah had said during one of their early conversations. They need someone who understands what it's like to count every dollar, to worry about payroll, to make decisions based on survival instead of growth. Most marketing consultants come from big companies or business school. They don't get it. Marcus had looked up from his notepad. What would you do differently? And that's how Sarah Martinez Solutions was born, not as a division of Thompson's company, but as her own business, with Marcus as a silent partner and mentor. Sarah's approach was different from anything Marcus had seen in the marketing world. Instead of fancy presentations and corporate buzzwords, Sarah met small business owners in their restaurants, their shops, their warehouses. She understood their struggles because she'd lived them. She knew what it was like to choose between paying for advertising and paying rent. Her first client was Rosa's Kitchen, a small Mexican restaurant in the North Side neighborhood where the owner, Rosa Gutierrez, had been struggling to compete with the chain restaurants moving into the area. Sarah spent a week working shifts at Rosa's, learning the business from the inside out. You don't need a fancy website, Sarah had told Rosa after observing how the restaurant really worked. You need your regular customers to bring their friends. And you need people to know that you make the best carnitas in Denver. Instead of expensive advertising, Sarah helped Rosa create a simple customer loyalty program and taught her how to use social media to showcase her daily specials. Within 2 months, Rosa's lunch rush had doubled, and the dinner crowd was growing every week. Word spread quickly in Denver's small business community. Sarah had a gift for understanding what business owners really needed, not what marketing companies thought they needed. More importantly, her prices were fair. She charged what small businesses could actually afford, not what big corporations paid for consulting. Marcus watched Sarah's confidence grow with every client success. The tired, stressed woman he'd met at the bank was transforming into someone who laughed easily, who had energy for her kids' school events, who talked about the future with excitement instead of dread. You know what I love most about this? Sarah had told Marcus just last week. I'm finally using my brain for something other than just surviving. I forgot how good it feels to solve real problems. The financial impact had been dramatic. Within 4 months, Sarah was making more money than she'd ever made at both her jobs combined. But more than that, she had control over her schedule. She could take Emma to her soccer games, help Jake with his homework without falling asleep at the kitchen table, and even have occasional evenings to herself. Last month, Sarah had made her first payment back to Marcus, not because he'd asked for it, but because she'd insisted. It was only $500, a tiny fraction of what he'd invested in her, but it represented something bigger. It represented Sarah's independence, her ability to honor her commitments, her transformation from someone who needed help to someone who could give it. The ripple effects had spread beyond just Sarah's family. Emma and Jake were different kids now that their mom wasn't constantly stressed about money. Emma had joined the school chess club and was talking about maybe becoming a lawyer someday. Jake had started taking swimming lessons and dreamed of being on the Olympic team. But perhaps the most unexpected change was in Marcus himself. Helping Sarah had reminded him why he'd started his business in the first place. Not just to make money, but to solve problems and help people build better lives. He'd begun looking for other opportunities to invest in people rather than just companies. "You changed my life, you know," Sarah had told Marcus a few weeks ago as they walked through City Park after a client meeting. "I think you changed mine too," Marcus had replied. "I'd forgotten what success actually feels like when it helps other people." Now, sitting in Starbucks on this sunny Tuesday morning, Sarah pulled out her laptop to show Marcus her latest project. She'd been working with a group of single parents who wanted to start their own businesses: a child care cooperative, a house cleaning service, a catering company run out of home kitchens. "I want to help them the way you helped me," Sarah said, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Not with handouts, but with real opportunities. I think we could create a whole network of small businesses that support each other." Marcus smiled as he looked at Sarah's detailed business plan. She'd become everything he'd hoped she could be and more. She wasn't just successful, she was creating success for others. "What do you need from me?" Marcus asked. "Just what you've always given me," Sarah said. "Belief that it's possible." As they worked through the details of Sarah's expansion plan, other customers in the coffee shop went about their daily routines, unaware that they were witnessing something remarkable. They were seeing what happened when someone with resources decided to invest in someone with potential. They were seeing how one act of kindness could create waves that touched dozens of lives. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. His 2 p.m. meeting was confirmed. A venture capital firm wanted to discuss investing in Thompson Solutions. A year ago, Marcus would have been focused solely on the financial opportunity. Today, he was thinking about how that investment could help him support more people like Sarah. "I have an idea," Marcus said suddenly. "What if we formalized this? What if we created a fund specifically designed to help working parents start businesses? Not loans they can't afford, not charity that makes them feel small, but real partnerships." Sarah looked up from her laptop, intrigued. "Like what you did for me, but bigger?" "Exactly. We could call it the Second Chance Fund. For people who have great ideas and work ethic, but just need someone to believe in them." Sarah grinned. "I love it. But I have one condition." "What's that?" "I want to be the one who finds them. I know what to look for." Marcus laughed. "Deal." As their meeting wrapped up, Sarah packed her laptop with the satisfaction of someone who loved what she did for work. Tonight, she'd pick up Emma and Jake from school herself. No more rushing between jobs. No more asking Mrs. Rodriguez to watch them for hours. They'd probably go to the park, maybe stop for ice cream. Definitely spend time together without the cloud of financial stress hanging over everything. "Marcus," Sarah said as they prepared to leave, "I know I've said this before, but thank you. Not just for the money or the opportunity, but for seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself." Marcus shook his head. "Sarah, I didn't create your potential. I just helped you remember it was there." As they walked out of Starbucks together, neither of them noticed the young woman at the corner table who had been listening to their conversation. Maria Santos was a single mom working 3 part-time jobs, struggling to support her 2 kids while dreaming of opening her own bakery. She'd been eavesdropping because she couldn't help but be inspired by what she'd heard. Maria pulled out her phone and Googled Sarah Martinez Solutions. If there were people out there who helped working parents build businesses, she wanted to know more. Maybe, just maybe, it was her turn for a second chance. 6 blocks away, at First National Bank on 17th Street, a new customer service representative named David was helping an elderly couple with their savings account. David was a single dad, working at the bank in the mornings and delivering food at night to support his teenage daughter. He was good at his job, patient with customers, and dreaming of something better. He had no idea that in a few months, Sarah Martinez would walk into his bank to open a business account for one of her new clients. He had no idea that Sarah would recognize something familiar in his tired eyes and his determination to provide for his child. And he had no idea that a simple conversation about dreams deferred might change his life forever. Because that's how kindness really works. It doesn't just help one person. It creates a ripple effect that spreads outward, touching lives in ways we never expect. Marcus Thompson had helped Sarah Martinez not just because it was the right thing to do, but because he understood something fundamental about human potential. Sometimes people don't need to be saved. They just need someone to believe in them. Today, Sarah Martinez was a successful business owner, a present mother, and someone who slept peacefully at night knowing she could pay her bills. But more importantly, she was someone who remembered what it felt like to struggle, and she was using that memory to help others find their own path to something better. Emma and Jake Martinez would grow up with a very different understanding of what was possible in life than their mom had. They would see that hard work could actually pay off, that dreams were worth pursuing, and that sometimes, when you least expect it, someone shows up to remind you that you're capable of more than just survival. And Marcus Thompson had learned that success isn't just about building wealth. It's about building the kind of world where everyone has a chance to thrive. The story of a rich businessman who saw a single mom working 2 jobs had become something much bigger. It had become a story about the power of human connection, the importance of lifting each other up, and the beautiful truth that when we invest in people, we don't just change their lives, we change our own. As Sarah drove to pick up her kids that afternoon, she smiled thinking about the text she'd received from Rosa Gutierrez that morning. Rosa's kitchen had just been featured in Denver's Best Local Restaurants list, and she wanted to thank Sarah for helping her believe that her little restaurant could compete with anyone. Tomorrow, Sarah would meet with 3 new potential clients, all referred by previous clients who had succeeded beyond their own expectations. Next week, she and Marcus would present their second chance fund proposal to a group of investors who were interested in funding something that made both financial and social sense. But today, Sarah Martinez was going to pick up her kids from school, help them with their homework, and maybe take them out for pizza to celebrate Jake's first swimming ribbon. It was a simple plan for a Tuesday evening, but for someone who had once worked 60 hours a week just to survive, simple pleasures felt like the greatest luxury of all. The best part, Sarah knew that somewhere in Denver, there was probably another single parent working 2 jobs, wondering if things would ever get easier. And soon, if Sarah had anything to say about it, that person would discover that sometimes the answer is yes, things can get better. Sometimes, when you least expect it, someone believes in you enough to help you believe in yourself. And that makes all the difference in the world.